A new sitcom came to CBS on October 3rd, 1961. That show was The Dick Van Dyke Show, and it focused on the adventures of an easygoing comedy writer named Rob Petrie, played by Dick Van Dyke. His beautiful wife was named Laura, and she was played by Mary Tyler Moore. And his two comedy co-writers, Sally Rogers, played by Rose Marie, and Buddy Sorrell, played by Maury Amsterdam, rounded out the show. At first, the show was going to be called Head of the Family, and it was going to star Carl Reiner. CBS didn't like that idea because they felt that Carl Reiner looked too Jewish and too intellectual, so they decided to cast Dick Van Dyke instead. Van Dyke actually took a risk when he took the show, because at the time he was starring in the hit Broadway play Bye Bye Birdie. So if the show had not worked out, he would have been an out-of-work actor. The original opening credits for the show were just a packet of photos of the cast spilling onto a table and being individually shown on screen. This opening was only used during the first season of the show. For the remaining 4 seasons, there were 2 classic openings that were used. One was the famous shot where Rob enters the room, greeting his wife and friends, and trips over the ottoman. Another version has him entering exactly the same way, walking towards the group and expertly sidestepping the ottoman. These openings were used randomly at the beginning of the show. Then there was actually one other opening where he enters the room, he sidesteps the ottoman, and then stumbles anyway. This one was only used on occasion. Dick Van Dyke says that a lot of viewers used to bet on which opening sequence would start each episode. The role of Rob Petrie was actually almost given to Johnny Carson. Luckily, he didn't get the role. Otherwise, The Tonight Show might have been a whole lot different. The original pilot of the show was shot on the same day that President John F. Kennedy was inaugurated. Dick Van Dyke was so nervous during that episode that he developed a cold sore on his upper lip, and they had to apply extra makeup to hide it. The show was filmed live before a studio audience at Desilu Studios, but there was one occasion where they didn't have a studio audience, and that day was November 22nd, 1963, the day of JFK's assassination. During the middle of the rehearsals, the cast heard about the assassination, and they decided to go ahead and film the episode, which was called Happy Birthday to Minnie Moore. They felt like they needed to record it, but not to do it in front of a studio audience, thinking that most of the studio audience would not be in the mood to laugh during that day. The Dick Van Dyke Show was sponsored by Kent Cigarettes, and they gave the cast and crew free cartons each week. Mary Tyler Moore was a heavy smoker back then, and she would routinely take her cartons of Kent cigarettes and the cartons of other non-smokers of the cast and trade them in at her local store for her preferred brand. The character of Buddy Sorrell, the wisecracking joke writer, was played by Maury Amsterdam, and this was actually based on Mel Brooks, who was a comedy writer for Sid Caesar's Show of Shows in the 1950s. And that's where he worked with the show's producer, Carl Reiner. Although they were bitter enemies on the show, in real life, Maury Amsterdam and Richard Deacon, who played Mel Cooley on the show, were actually very close friends. Many of the best insults that Buddy hurled at Mel were worked out after hours, while the two of them were having drinks after work. The show was not successful in its first season, and was actually canceled by CBS. Producer Danny Thomas had to personally go to the network executives and convince them to leave the show on the air. The show finally picked up steam during the summer reruns that year, and became the classic series that we know today. Now what's really ironic is that after Dick Van Dyke decided to end the series in 1966, it was then CBS executives who actually begged him to stay on. When Carl Reiner was running low on creative fuel for the show, he would simply gather around the cast and the crew and ask them how their lives were going. Their answers became the inspiration for future shows. You may notice when you watch the show that there were no political, cultural, or historical references in the show. The writers did this so that the Dick Van Dyke Show would be kept timeless and remain relevant well into the future. During the 4th season, actress Rose Marie suffered the tragic loss of her husband, with whom she had been married for 20 years. She actually felt that the grief and the pain that she was experiencing made her want to leave the show entirely. But John Rich, one of the show's directors, was there to console her and to convince her to come back and finish up the remainder of the show, and she did. The original script was meant to concentrate on Rob Petrie's life at work, with more scenes taking place at the office. Rosemarie's character of Sally Rogers was meant to be the female lead, but after the viewers and the producers took notice of the chemistry between Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore, the writers decided to shift the focus to Rob's life at home. Dick Van Dyke has admitted that he was a people pleaser, and he always made an effort to appear pleasant and happy. Most of the time this went pretty well, but rather than voicing his concerns to coworkers and friends, he turned to alcohol to make himself feel more at ease. This method of dealing with stress slowly developed into a serious problem. He would later check into a rehab center and be treated for alcoholism. A small controversy occurred when Mary Tyler Moore started wearing capri pants on the show. The executives at CBS came unglued about this. It was their job to censor what was put on television, and at the time all TV housewives wore dresses like June Cleaver and Alice Cramden. Mary Tyler Moore insisted that all the housewives that she knew wore pants. She was allowed to keep wearing her capris, and the pants became a fashion icon for women across America. The other thing that the censors really watched closely was the situation in the couple's bedroom. They couldn't share a bed, so they had 2 separate ones, much like the I Love Lucy show. At the time, with the conservative nature of television programming of the 60s, it's really no surprise that CBS didn't want to show Rob and Laura sharing a bed. Going into the role of Laura on the Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary Tyler Moore knew that she was lacking acting experience, so she decided to do what every good actress does, draw inspiration from one of her idols. She chose to study the work of Katharine Hepburn, and in some of the early episodes, you can catch her using the line, "Oh darling," which is something Hepburn would say. Initially, Mary Tyler Moore almost missed out on the show altogether. After Carl Reiner had found Dick Van Dyke, he struggled to find the perfect actress to play Laura. He stated that he really didn't know what he was looking for, but leave it to Danny Thomas to figure it all out. He suggested that they call Mary Tyler Moore, who was reluctant to go to the audition because she was fearful of rejection. She had been rejected 2 times already that same week for other parts, but as soon as she entered the room, Reiner knew he had found his Laura. The entire cast and crew of the Dick Van Dyke Show made this a fun sitcom to watch, and it remains a classic that is still worth watching today. If you haven't seen the show in a while, it might be worth a second look, especially if you miss these early days of television. If you enjoyed this video, check out the description for links that help support the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching.